May the Lord be with you, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Stout over here at St. Peter's Lutheran, and this is our Faith 5 video for the week. And I gotta tell you, I was sitting here having some difficulty deciding what I ought to speak of. Not because there's any dearth of pertinent topics, but because there is a superabundance, and it's hard to know where to begin. It's been kind of a wild week, hasn't it? It has been less than a week since a very strange mob made up of white supremacists, Christian nationalists, neo-pagan Norse Viking wannabes, and QAnon conspiracy theorists all stormed the nation's capital for the first time in U.S. history. That was a heck of a thing to watch unfold online. On top of the national scene, I mean more locally, report cards are going home. I know that there are many young people who have struggled in distance learning, despite the very best efforts of the faculty and staff at the school who've done an amazing job, given all the challenges they've faced. Nonetheless, some report cards are coming home with grades that are worse than parents may have expected. I know this obviously isn't everyone, but I've heard enough stories, enough sympathy to know that the events of the past year, the past semester, have affected our kids, whether it's the virus or distance learning, not seeing their friends, chaos on the national news. And if you keep up with any of the stuff that we post over on our parish Facebook page, you may have seen Sunday worship was unexpectedly interrupted when my youngest daughter, who was our crucifer, keeled right over, right at the beginning of service, passed out, cold. And thankfully, in the small group gathered in the sanctuary, there were two nurses who leapt right to her aid, and then firefighters showed up, and then EMTs came with an ambulance, and I think by the third time she was getting the once over, she was pretty well freaked out and just wanted to go home and rest. And that is a scary thing for a congregation, for a kid, for a parent. Consensus is, it wasn't a seizure. She didn't crack her head going down, thank God. It was probably just the fact that she decided to skip breakfast in lieu of cartoons, and then stood up front first thing in the morning, holding a big heavy cross, and just passed out. That is a first for me, both as a pastor and as a father. So with everything chaotic, with everything stressful, with all of the things that we used to think were bedrock supports of our society kind of up in the air, where does that leave us as individuals, as a people, as the body of Christ? Some of the images of public Christianity these last few months and years and decades are such that the populace at large has been alienated by the loudest and wealthiest and often the crudest among us who claim the title of Christian. I know pastors, faithful pastors, who no longer like to use the term Christian because it's become so freighted in our context in 21st century America. They prefer, disciples or followers of Jesus, so as to distance themselves from the more militant or political or profit-driven reflections of Christian faith. In other words, the ones you see in headlines and on the news and saying very stupid things on internet videos and social media. It's at times like these that, I take comfort in the grace that is before me. A colleague, a friend of mine, likes to say that there is a great big field ready for harvest. And while it's wonderful to be aware of that field, your job is your row, harvesting the crop that's right in front of you, doing the good that's right in front of you. We are to love all people, of course, but the neighbor, whether he's a friend or a foe or someone you've never noticed before, someone who hates your guts. Your neighbor is your responsibility. You are your brother's keeper. There's a lovely little parable by Chad Bird, a Hebrew professor, who wrote, well, he's written several books, but the one I've recently gotten is a 365-day daily devotional looking at the Hebrew of the First Testament and using the First Testament of the Bible to connect it with the New Testament, so that no matter where we open the Scriptures, we as Christians look for and to Christ. And the devotional starts off with a lovely little parable in a letter. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning. And in Hebrew, that first word of the first book of the Bible begins with the letter Bet, which, not surprisingly, it's the equivalent of B in English. And the way you draw Bet is almost like a little box with three sides and then one open side. And in Hebrew, you read right to left, and so the open side is the direction you're going in. And the teaching that Chad Bird expressed in pointing this out, pointing out the first letter of the Scriptures, is that a Christian really, or our Jewish forebears, our job is not terribly to be concerned with what came before us, what is above us, or below us. Our job is to go forward on the path that God has set for us. So, it may be that there were worlds of creation before this one. It may be that there are levels of reality above and below that are far beyond mortal ken. And that's wonderful. But that's not our primary concern. In the beginning is our beginning, the start of our story. And the entire story of the Old Testament leading into the New Testament, and the story of Jesus and the church, is the love that God has for the wayward children of earth, right? You've probably heard me say before, one thing that makes us all human and makes all humans religious is that we can tell there's a difference between the way the world is and the way the world ought to be. The Christian terminology for this is the fall, right? There's the distance between ought and is. That's our fall from grace. And this fall is remedied by God, not by force, not by snapping his almighty fingers and making the world be good. It is remedied by God by entering into our story, right? The author becoming a character in his own work. And the relationships that God has with the most unlikely of peoples, with the elderly, with the homeless, with slaves, with fugitives, with criminals, with legitimate sinners, whom God claims as his own and forgives and raises up to glorious purpose. And this culminates, of course, in Jesus Christ, who does not simply know God, but who is God himself, God with us, God as one of us. When the world is too big of a mess for us to even deal with in a healthy manner, we shouldn't be quietistic. We shouldn't shirk our responsibility to work for change in the world. But our focus, I think, should be on the relationships that we have with our neighbors, our immediate community, our family. That's where we'll find life and support and inspiration and healing and new birth that will give us the base, the strength that we need to enact necessary change on a broader institutional level. Whether we're talking about the church, so many people love Jesus but want nothing to do with the church because they don't see how the church even relates to Jesus anymore, or whether we're talking about the government and politics, because no matter where we are on the partisan divide, I think it's clear that what we're doing is not working, and that there needs to be a lot of healing, a reckoning, a fresh start. And we can't just jump into that as individuals on our little internet screens, typing madly away, throwing out videos and opinions and comments as if that's going to change anything. It's not. We need to focus on children in our community, the family in our homes, the needy, the hungry in our towns, in our counties. And when we have that, when we have a body, a community upholding us, supporting us, loving us, then we have both the boldness and the humility to speak out to the greater needs of the greater good. When my daughter went over from exhaustion or hunger or stress or what have you, there were people in the congregation who immediately launched forward. There were people in the community who are not part of our congregation who immediately came to the rescue. There were people from the next town over who drove over as fast as they could in an emergency vehicle in order to make sure that that little girl was okay and cared for and healthy and happy and loved and able to go home with her father and her brother, to the family that loves her, that supports her. There's the old bit from Mr. Rogers that I'm sure you've seen on the internet somewhere. Mr. Rogers used to talk about how when he was a little kid he'd see terrible things on the news, and he wanted to know. He asked his mother, "Where's God when terrible things happen?" And his mother said, "Don't despair. Look for the helpers. There are always people there who are helping. That's where we'll find God. That's where we'll find inspiration. That's where we will find the hope that we need, so that we too can be the helpers for those in our community, those within reach of our helping hands." you know, this morning while I was sort of wrestling with all this, a gentleman stopped by, fell in the congregation, who has his own laser engraver, and he brought me this little gift. The devil saw me with my head down and thought he'd won until I said amen. Not only is the image inspirational, but the simple fact that he took the time to make that for me, to buy a frame for it, to bring it over first thing in the morning, that's kindness, that's love, that's support. And he didn't do it because he knew that I was particularly struggling with anything, or I'm not even sure if he knew what happened on Sunday that put such a fear in me. He just wanted to do something kind, and he did. And that's where we find God. Christ wasn't an emperor or a general. He was a wandering rabbi who healed the sick and welcomed the sinner and had dinner with prostitutes and raised the dead, and just generally went where no one else was willing to go, to the edges of society, to gather in the lost, the forsaken, the despairing. And it means something that we do not simply confess Jesus as a decent guy who knew God, but rather we confess as Christians that Jesus is God. That's who God is. That's where God is. So, if you need a little divine inspiration, I will always recommend silence, contemplation, taking the time to breathe, taking the time to go out in nature, to read the scriptures. All of that is good and healthy and Christian. But the message I want to give you today and this week is that God is with us in the mess, and you will see him clearly in the helpers. Anyway, a little bit rambling. I apologize for that. It's just a thought. Go in peace, serve the Lord, and thanks be to God.